The billionaire sat freezing on a Chicago sidewalk, disguised in rags, watching the broken man whose life she was about to destroy or save. Carter Hayes didn't recognize the shivering woman outside the restaurant. He just saw someone cold and hungry. So the struggling single father, who could barely afford the date he was already late for, bought her coffee and food without a second thought. What he didn't know was that she held the evidence to destroy the empire built on his stolen dreams. If you want to see how one act of kindness brought down a billion-dollar lie, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through Chicago's downtown like a blade that February night, the kind of cold that made your bones ache and your breath freeze midair. Carter Hayes stood outside Marcello's, one of those restaurants with cloth napkins and prices that made his stomach turn, trying to convince himself this wasn't a mistake. 3 years. 3 years since Sarah died, and this was his first real date. His sister Emma had practically shoved him out the door. "You're 32, not dead," she'd said, adjusting his tie while his son Dylan watched cartoons in the next room. "Go, have dinner with a normal adult. Remember what that feels like." Carter checked his phone. 7:47 p.m. 13 minutes late already. Chloe, the woman Emma had set him up with, was probably wondering if he'd stood her up. He should go inside. He'd borrowed this jacket from his brother-in-law. The reservation had his name on it. Everything was set. But his hand stayed frozen on the door handle. Through the glass, he could see couples laughing over wine, the soft glow of candles on white tablecloths, the easy comfort of people who belonged in places like this, people whose lives hadn't been gutted and left in pieces, people who weren't him anymore. He took a breath, tasting the metallic bite of winter air, and turned to pull open the door, then stopped. A woman sat on the concrete beside the entrance, her back against the brick wall. Young, maybe late 20s, early 30s. She wore a thin gray coat that had seen better years, no gloves, no hat. A paper cup sat empty beside her, and she had her arms wrapped tight around herself, trying to trap whatever warmth her body could still generate. Carter had walked past enough people on Chicago's streets to recognize the difference between professional panhandlers and real desperation. This woman wasn't performing. She was just cold. Really, genuinely cold, the kind that crept into your chest and made breathing hurt. Their eyes met for a second. She didn't ask for anything, didn't hold out the cup, just looked at him with this flat, exhausted expression that said she'd already decided he would walk past like everyone else. Carter glanced through the restaurant window again. He could see a woman sitting alone at a corner table, checking her phone. Probably Chloe. Probably annoyed. Probably about to leave. He looked back at the woman on the ground. "Hell," he muttered. 5 minutes later, he came back out carrying a to-go container of soup, a sandwich wrapped in paper, and a large coffee with extra cream. The woman blinked up at him, confused. "It's hot," Carter said, setting the coffee in her hands. "Be careful." She stared at the cup like she didn't trust it to be real. "I got you some food, too," he added, crouching down to set the container beside her. "Tomato soup. Probably better than it should be for a place this expensive. And there's a turkey sandwich if you don't like soup." The woman's fingers tightened around the coffee cup, and for a second, Carter thought he saw something crack in her expression, something raw underneath the careful blankness. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice was rougher than he expected, like she hadn't used it much recently. "Stay warm," Carter said, standing. "There's a shelter on West Monroe if you need somewhere tonight. About 6 blocks that way." She nodded, but didn't say anything else. Carter pulled open the restaurant door, shaking off the cold as he stepped into the warmth. A hostess in a black dress smiled at him professionally. "Reservation for Hayes," he said. "I'm running a little late." "Of course, sir. Right this way." She led him through the maze of tables toward the back corner where Chloe sat scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he approached, and Carter immediately clocked the slight tightness around her eyes. The universal expression of someone who'd been kept waiting and was trying to decide if she was annoyed or understanding. "Carter?" she asked, setting her phone down. "Yeah, sorry I'm late." He slid into the seat across from her, shrugging off his jacket. "Got held up." "No problem." Chloe's smile warmed a fraction. "I was starting to think Emma gave me the wrong guy." She was pretty in that careful, deliberate way some women managed. Dark hair pulled back, makeup precise, A blue dress that probably cost more than Carter's monthly grocery budget. Professional, put together, normal. Everything Emma promised she would be. Emma has a talent for exaggeration, Carter said, trying to find his footing in this conversation. I hope she didn't oversell me. She said you were a good guy who needed to get out more. Chloe tilted her head. Was she wrong? About the getting out more part? Definitely not. Chloe laughed, and some of the tension in Carter's chest loosened. Maybe this wouldn't be a complete disaster. Maybe he could actually do this, sit across from someone, make conversation, pretend he was a normal person living a normal life. The waiter appeared with menus and water glasses, rattling off specials in that rehearsed way servers had. Carter ordered a beer he didn't really want. Chloe got white wine. They made small talk about the weather, about how cold February in Chicago always felt, about how much they both hated winter. Safe topics, easy topics. So Emma mentioned you work in construction? Chloe asked after their drinks arrived. Yeah, small jobs mostly, renovations, repairs, that kind of thing. That's interesting. Do you enjoy it? Carter took a sip of beer, buying himself a second to figure out how to answer that. The truth was complicated. The truth was that he'd once been a senior architect at Vaughan and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious design firms. The truth was that he'd loved that work with an intensity that had defined most of his 20s. The creative problem solving, the technical challenges, the satisfaction of seeing something he'd imagined become real. But that was before. Before Sarah got sick. Before Richard Vaughan stabbed him in the back. Before his entire life collapsed, and he had to rebuild from scratch with a grieving 5-year-old who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. It pays the bills, Carter said finally. Keeps me busy. Chloe nodded like that was a perfectly acceptable answer, but Carter caught something in her expression, a flicker of disappointment maybe, like she'd been hoping for something more. What about you? He asked, redirecting. Emma said you work in marketing? Corporate communications, actually, for Sinclair Industries. The name registered somewhere in the back of Carter's mind. Big company. Billionaire CEO. One of those corporate empires that seemed to have fingers in everything. That sounds impressive, Carter said. It has its moments. Chloe smiled. We're expanding into new developments right now. Lots of exciting projects in the pipeline. They talked through appetizers and into the main course, the conversation flowing easier than Carter expected. Chloe was smart, funny in a dry sort of way, and she didn't push when he clearly didn't want to elaborate on something. By the time their entrees arrived, Carter had almost relaxed. Almost. So, this is going to sound random, Chloe said, cutting into her salmon, but have you been following the new waterfront development on the south side, the Horizon Project? Carter's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The Horizon Project. The name hit him like a fist to the sternum, knocking the air from his lungs. For a second, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except sit there with his fork frozen in midair while his brain tried to process what she'd just said. Carter? Chloe's voice seemed to come from very far away. You okay? He forced himself to set the fork down carefully. Yeah, sorry, what about it? I just think it's fascinating from a design perspective, Chloe continued, oblivious to the way Carter's entire body had gone rigid. Richard Vaughan is brilliant. The way he integrated the public spaces with the commercial development, it's really innovative. Richard Vaughan is brilliant. The words scraped against Carter's skull like broken glass. You know Richard Vaughan? Carter asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Not personally, but I've heard him speak at a couple conferences. Very charismatic guy. And the Horizon Project is getting so much attention, there's talk it might win some major awards this year. Carter reached for his beer and drained half of it in one swallow. The Horizon Project. The development that had made Richard Vaughan a legend in Chicago's architectural community. The ambitious, groundbreaking design that had put Vaughan and Associates on the international map. The billion-dollar masterpiece that every architecture magazine in the country had featured. The project Carter had designed alone in his apartment at 3 a.m. while his wife slept in the next room, too weak from chemo to get out of bed. The project he'd poured everything into during the worst 6 months of his life, working through the grief and terror and exhaustion because creating something beautiful was the only thing that kept him sane. The project Richard Vaughn had stolen from his personal files 3 days after Sarah's funeral and claimed as his own. Carter? He realized Chloe was staring at him with concern now. Her wine glass paused halfway to her lips.
Sorry, Carter said again. Just remembered something. What were you saying? I was just asking if you'd seen any of the renderings. They're really stunning. Excuse me for a second. Carter stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. A couple at the next table glanced over. He ignored them. Bathroom, he said shortly, already walking away before Chloe could respond.
He made it to the men's room and locked himself in a stall, pressing his palms against the cold metal divider and trying to breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs. His hands were shaking. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Richard Vaughn destroyed his life, and Carter had built his entire existence around not thinking about it, around accepting that some injustices never got fixed, around focusing on Dylan and work and getting through each day without falling apart. And now this woman, this stranger Emma had set him up with, was sitting in a restaurant praising Richard Vaughn's genius, praising the project Carter had created, calling the thief brilliant. Carter leaned his forehead against the stall divider and closed his eyes. Maybe this was the universe's way of telling him he wasn't ready, that he'd never be ready, that some parts of his old life were just gone and trying to move forward was pointless. He stayed there for maybe 2 minutes, maybe 5, breathing slowly until his heart rate came down and his hands stopped shaking. Then he straightened up, flushed the toilet for appearance's sake, and went to wash his hands. His reflection in the mirror looked tired, older than 32, like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Get it together, he told himself. Go back out there. Finish dinner. Be normal. He dried his hands and pushed back through the bathroom door. Chloe was on her phone when he returned to the table, but she set it down quickly as he sat. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, fine. They ate in silence for a moment. Carter could feel the evening souring, the easy rapport from earlier evaporating into awkwardness. He should say something, salvage this somehow. But he couldn't find the words. Chloe set down her fork. Carter, can I be honest with you about something? Sure. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. Plain, unmarked, the kind lawyers used. She set it on the table between them with the careful precision of someone executing a rehearsed action. Carter stared at it. What's that? I need you to look at something, Chloe said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something more formal, professional. Carter's stomach dropped. Chloe, please just look. He opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, dense paragraphs of text in that specific font lawyers loved, full of whereas and heretofore and party of the first part. Carter's eyes skimmed over the words, trying to make sense of what he was reading. Settlement agreement, release of claims. Carter Hayes, hereinafter referred to as claimant. Vaughn and Associates, hereinafter referred to as released party. His vision tunneled. What the hell is this? His voice came out flat, deadly quiet. It's a settlement offer, Chloe said. She wasn't looking at him anymore. $15,000 in exchange for a permanent release of any claims related to the Horizon project or any work product created during your employment at Vaughn and Associates. Carter's hands tightened on the folder until the edges crumpled. You work for Richard. It wasn't a question. Chloe's silence was answer enough. This whole thing, Carter gestured between them, his voice rising despite his efforts to control it. This date, Emma setting us up, all of it was just to get me to sign this? It's a generous offer, Carter. $15,000 for what? For my silence? He laughed, sharp and humorless. For letting Richard keep pretending he designed the Horizon project? You don't have any proof, Chloe said quietly. No documentation, no witnesses, nothing that would hold up in court. This offer is a courtesy, a chance to walk away with something instead of nothing. Carter stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor. The restaurant went quiet. Every head turned toward their table. The couple nearby stopped mid-conversation. A waiter froze with a tray of drinks. Even the soft background music seemed to pause. Carter didn't care. Tell Richard, he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, that he can take his courtesy and shove it straight up his... Sir, the manager appeared beside their table, professional concern masking irritation. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Carter bit out. I was just leaving. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the fallen chair and walked out, through the dining room, past the hostess stand, past the warmth and the candlelight, and the normal people having normal evenings. Out into the brutal cold. The woman he'd given food to was gone. The sidewalk where she'd sat was empty except for the discarded coffee cup rolling in the wind. Carter stood there, breathing hard, his hand still shaking, but now from fury instead of fear.
3 years of keeping his head down. 3 years of accepting what happened and moving on. 3 years of building a quiet life for himself and Dylan, away from the architecture world that had chewed him up and spit him out. And Richard Vaughn still couldn't let it go. Still had to come after him with lawyers and fake dates and settlement offers. Still had to make sure Carter stayed broken. "Excuse me." Carter spun around. A woman stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of an expensive-looking black coat. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, sharp features and sharper eyes that seemed to take in everything about him in a single glance. Not the woman from earlier, someone else. "Do I know you?" Carter asked roughly. "No, but I know you." She stepped closer. "My name is Vanessa Sinclair, and I think we need to talk about Richard Vaughn." Outside the restaurant, 9:15 p.m., Carter stared at the woman who'd just introduced herself as Vanessa Sinclair. The name registered this time. Really registered. Sinclair Industries, the billionaire CEO Chloe had mentioned working for. "I don't know what game you're playing," Carter said, "but I'm done for the night. Tell whoever sent you that it." "Nobody sent me." Vanessa's voice was calm, steady. "I've been investigating Richard Vaughn's business practices for the past 4 months, and I know what he did to you." Carter went very still. "You don't know anything about me. I know you worked at Vaughn & Associates from 2019 to 2023. I know your wife Sarah died of ovarian cancer in January 2023. I know you were terminated 3 weeks later for alleged performance issues." Vanessa's eyes never left his face. "And I know the Horizon Project, the design that made Richard Vaughn a celebrity architect, was created by you during your wife's final months, then stolen from your personal files after her death." The words hit Carter like physical blows. "How?" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "How do you know that?" "Because I have proof." Carter's heart stuttered. "That's not possible. There's no proof. I worked on it at home, on my personal laptop. There's no record of—" "There are always records," Vanessa interrupted. "Digital footprints, metadata, timestamps on files, server logs from the nights you emailed design elements to yourself, security footage from the office showing when Richard accessed your workstation." She paused. "Your laptop backed up to cloud storage automatically. Did you know that?" Carter's legs felt unsteady. "I need to sit down." "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here," Vanessa said. "Quiet, private. We can talk there." "Why would you help me?" "I'm not helping you." Something flickered across Vanessa's face, an expression Carter couldn't quite read. "I'm building a case against Richard Vaughn's company for corporate fraud and IP theft. You're not his only victim, but you're the one with the strongest documentation." Carter looked back at Marcello's. Through the windows, he could see Chloe still sitting at their table, talking on her phone, probably calling Richard, probably reporting that the settlement offer had failed. $15,000, Carter said quietly. "That's what they think my work is worth." "The Horizon Project generated over $800 million in revenue last year," Vanessa replied. "Richard Vaughn's personal compensation was $42 million. Your work is worth considerably more than $15,000. The numbers felt abstract, meaningless. What did millions matter when Carter could barely afford Dylan's school supplies? "I have a son," Carter said, 7 years old. "If I go after Richard, he'll come after me. He'll drag this out in court for years. He'll make sure I can't work, can't—" "That's why you need a lawyer who can match his resources." Vanessa pulled a business card from her coat pocket. "My legal team will represent you pro bono. No upfront costs, no fees unless we win." Carter took the card. Heavy card stock, raised lettering, the kind of business card that cost more than it should. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you care about this?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Because I watched you give food to a freezing stranger when you could barely afford your own dinner, she said finally. Because Richard Vaughn has spent his entire career taking credit for other people's work. And because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are terrible. She turned to leave, then paused. I was the woman outside, Vanessa added. The one you gave coffee to. I needed to know what kind of person you were before I offered to destroy your life for the second time. Carter's mind reeled. You what? Think about it, Carter. If you take this to court, everything gets dragged into the light. Your wife's illness, your termination, every detail of the worst period of your life becomes public record. Vanessa's expression softened slightly. I needed to know if you were someone doing this for revenge, or someone who genuinely deserved justice. There's a difference. And sitting in the cold told you which one I was? You didn't recognize me. You didn't know I was rich or powerful or connected to any of this. You just saw someone who needed help. She met his eyes. That told me everything I needed to know. A taxi pulled up to the curb. Vanessa opened the door, then looked back at Carter one more time. I'll be in my office tomorrow from 9 to 5. The address is on the card. Come if you want to fight back. Don't come if you'd rather take the settlement and move on. She climbed into the taxi. Either way, I won't judge you. The taxi pulled away, leaving Carter standing alone on the sidewalk with a business card in his hand and his entire world tilting sideways. Carter's apartment. 11:30 p.m. Dylan was asleep when Carter got home. Emma looked up from the couch where she'd been reading, took one look at Carter's face, and set her book down. That bad? She asked. Carter hung up his jacket without answering. Carter, what happened? Your friend Chloe works for Richard Vaughn, he said flatly. The whole date was a setup to get me to sign a settlement agreement. Emma's mouth fell open. What? No, Carter, I swear I didn't. I know you didn't know. He rubbed his face tiredly. Richard's been planning this. He wanted to make sure I'd never have grounds to come after him for the Horizon project. That son of a... Emma caught herself, glancing toward Dylan's bedroom. What are you going to do? Carter pulled out Vanessa's business card and set it on the coffee table. Emma picked it up, her eyes widening. Sinclair Industries? Carter, this is... I know who she is. She wants to help you sue Richard? She has evidence, proof that I designed the Horizon project. Carter sank into the armchair across from his sister. Digital files, metadata, everything. Emma stared at him. Then you have to do it. Carter, this is your chance to... To what? Spend the next 3 years in court while Richard's lawyers tear apart every detail of my life? To put Dylan through that? He shook his head. I've already lost Sarah. Lost my career. I can't lose my son too. You won't lose Dylan. Richard will make it impossible for me to work. He'll drag my name through the press. He'll make sure every construction company in Chicago knows I'm suing my former employer. And for what? Money I'll spend on lawyers? Recognition I don't need anymore? Emma was quiet for a long moment. What did Sarah want you to do? She asked finally. The question hit Carter like a punch to the gut. He thought about Sarah in the hospital bed, too weak to sit up but still insisting Carter show her the latest designs, still asking questions about material costs and sightlines and structural integrity, even though every word exhausted her, still believing he could create something beautiful even when everything else was falling apart. She wanted me to build things that mattered, Carter said quietly. To not give up on the work just because it was hard. Then don't give up now. Carter looked at his sister, at the fierce determination in her eyes, so much like their mother's had been. I'm scared, he admitted. I'm so tired of fighting, Emma. And I'm scared that if I do this, I'll lose the only good thing I have left. Emma reached across and squeezed his hand. Dylan doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to show him what it looks like to stand up for yourself. She held up Vanessa's card. Go talk to her. Hear what she has to say, then decide. Carter took the card back and stared at the embossed lettering. Vanessa Sinclair, CEO, Sinclair Industries. A woman who'd sat in the freezing cold just to see what kind of person he was. A woman who probably had no reason to care about one broken architect's stolen work. A woman offering him something he'd thought was impossible. A chance to fight back. Okay, Carter said finally. I'll go talk to her.
Emma smiled. Good. Now go check on your kid and get some sleep. You look like hell. Carter managed a weak laugh and headed toward Dylan's room. He pushed open the door quietly and stood in the doorway, watching his son sleep with the nightlight casting soft shadows across the race car bedsheets. Dylan looked so small, so fragile, so blissfully unaware of how complicated the world was about to get. I'm going to try, Carter whispered. I don't know if it'll work, but I'm going to try. Dylan shifted in his sleep, clutching his stuffed dinosaur closer. Carter stood there for a long time, memorizing this moment of peace before everything changed again. Then he closed the door and went to bed, knowing sleep wouldn't come easy, knowing tomorrow would alter the trajectory of his life, knowing that sometimes the scariest thing you could do was hope for something better. Carter didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the headlights from passing cars sweep across the plaster in slow arcs. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that manila folder, the neat legal text, Chloe's careful, professional expression as she slid it across the table. $15,000 for his silence. $800 million in revenue from his work. The math didn't make him angry anymore. It just made him tired. At 6 a.m., he gave up on sleep and got out of bed. Dylan wouldn't be up for another hour, which gave Carter time to make coffee and stand at the kitchen window watching the city wake up. The sky was that particular shade of gray Chicago wore in winter. Not quite dark, not quite light, just existing somewhere in between. He pulled out Vanessa Sinclair's business card again. The address was downtown. Walking distance from Marcello's, actually. Some high-rise office building he'd probably passed 100 times without noticing. Emma's words echoed in his head. Dylan doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to show him what it looks like to stand up for yourself. But what if standing up meant losing everything they'd built? What if fighting back just made things worse? Carter was still turning the card over in his hands when Dylan padded into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up at odd angles. "You're up early," Dylan said, climbing onto a stool at the counter. "Couldn't sleep." Carter pocketed the card and reached for the cereal. "Cocoa Puffs or Cheerios?" "Cocoa Puffs, obviously." Dylan propped his chin on his hands. "How was your date?" Carter poured cereal into a bowl, buying himself a moment. "It was complicated." "Did you like her?" "Not really, buddy." "Good. Aunt Emma said you needed to go on dates, but I think that's dumb. We're fine, just us." Carter set the bowl in front of his son, throat tight. "Yeah, we are." Dylan crunched cereal contentedly while Carter made him lunch for school. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, the granola bar Dylan would trade to his friend Marcus for cheese crackers. Normal morning routine, normal life. Except nothing felt normal anymore. After dropping Dylan at school, Carter stood on the sidewalk and pulled out his phone. He had 3 voice messages from Emma, 2 texts asking if he was okay, and 1 missed call from a number he didn't recognize. He deleted Emma's messages without listening and stared at Vanessa's business card. 9 to 5, she'd said. "Come if you want to fight back." Carter checked the time. 8:47 a.m. He started walking. The Sinclair Industries building was one of those modern glass towers that reflected the sky so completely you could barely tell where the structure ended and the air began. Carter stood across the street for a solid 5 minutes, just looking at it. People in expensive suits flowed in and out of the revolving doors. Everyone moved with purpose, with direction, like they all knew exactly where they belonged. Carter used to move like that. Used to wear suits that fit properly and carry blueprints under his arm and stride into buildings like he owned them. Now he wore work boots and a canvas jacket with paint stains on the sleeve, and he felt like an imposter just standing on the sidewalk. He crossed the street anyway. The lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of aggressively modern design that prioritized aesthetics over comfort. A security desk sat dead center, manned by a guard who looked like he bench-pressed cars for fun. "Help you?" the guard asked. "I have a meeting with Vanessa Sinclair." The guard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Name?" "Carter Hayes." The guard typed something into his computer, frowned, typed some more. "I don't see you on the schedule. She told me to come by this morning, said she'd be here from 9 to 5. Ms. Sinclair doesn't take walk-ins." The guard's tone made it clear this conversation was over. "You'll need to make an appointment through her assistant." Carter pulled out the business card and set it on the desk. She gave me this last night, told me to come if I wanted to talk. The guard looked at the card, then at Carter, clearly trying to reconcile the expensive card stock with the guy in paint-stained Carhartt. Wait here. He picked up a phone and had a quiet conversation Carter couldn't hear. After a minute, he hung up and slid a visitor badge across the desk. 47th floor. Elevators are to your left. Carter clipped the badge to his jacket and headed for the elevators, feeling the guard's suspicious gaze follow him across the lobby. The elevator was glass-walled, offering a dizzying view of the city as it climbed. Carter watched Chicago spread out below him, the grid of streets, the frozen lake, the buildings getting smaller and smaller until they looked like toys. The doors opened on the 47th floor. If the lobby was aggressively modern, this was something else entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than Carter's truck, abstract art on the walls that he was pretty sure he'd seen in a museum once. A woman in her 50s sat at a reception desk that looked carved from a single piece of black stone. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked. "Yes." "Miss Sinclair is expecting you. This way, please." She led him down a hallway lined with more abstract art and offices with glass walls. People worked at standing desks, talked on phones, typed on laptops with the focused intensity of people who build by the hour. Carter felt profoundly out of place. The receptionist stopped at a corner office, naturally, and knocked once before pushing open the door. "Mr. Hayes, to see you." "Thank you, Patricia." Vanessa Sinclair sat behind a desk that was somehow both massive and minimalist, reviewing something on a tablet. She looked different in daylight, still sharp, still assessing, but there was something softer about her now that Carter couldn't quite identify. She was wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her dark hair pulled back in the same severe ponytail from last night. No jewelry except small diamond studs in her ears. Everything about her screamed power and precision. "Mr. Hayes," she said, setting down the tablet. "You came. You said 9 to 5. I say a lot of things. People don't always listen." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit. Coffee?" "I'm good." Vanessa studied him for a moment, then stood and crossed to a side table where an espresso machine sat gleaming. She made herself a cup with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "You look like you didn't sleep," she observed. "I didn't." "Second thoughts?" "About 100 of them." Vanessa returned to her desk with her espresso and sat. "Want to share?" Carter leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why are you really doing this? And don't give me that line about corporate fraud. You're a billionaire CEO. You don't personally investigate architects getting screwed by their former bosses." "You're right, I don't." Vanessa sipped her coffee. "Normally I have people who handle this kind of thing, but Richard Vaughn isn't a normal case." "What does that mean?" "It means he's been stealing intellectual property and design work for 15 years, and he's very good at covering his tracks. It means he's built an empire on other people's talent while making sure they can't prove it. And it means I've been trying to take him down for 6 months with no success because everyone he's stolen from is too scared or too broken to fight back." She set down her cup. "Then I found you, and you have documentation he doesn't know exists. Cloud backups, email timestamps, security footage from office servers. You're the crack in his armor, Carter. You're how I bring the whole thing down." Carter sat back in his chair. "So I'm just ammunition to you. If I wanted ammunition, I'd have approached you through lawyers and never shown my face." Vanessa's expression didn't change. "I sat in the freezing cold outside that restaurant because I needed to know if you were worth fighting for. If you were someone who'd use this opportunity to burn everything down out of spite. Or if you were someone who actually deserved justice. And the coffee test told you which one. You could have walked past me. Most people did. You were late for a date you clearly didn't want to go on, at a restaurant you couldn't afford, and you still stopped to help a stranger." Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "That told me you're not doing this for revenge. You're doing this because what happened to you was wrong, and you're tired of pretending it wasn't." The words hit closer than Carter wanted to admit. "I have a son," he said quietly, 7 years old. "If this goes wrong, if Richard comes after me the way I know he will, Dylan's the one who suffers." "If you take the settlement, what does Dylan learn?" Vanessa asked. "That when someone steals from you, you stay quiet and accept whatever scraps they throw your way?" "He learns that sometimes you have to choose between being right
and being safe. And which one are you choosing? Carter didn't answer.
Vanessa stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. From up here, Chicago looked clean and orderly. You couldn't see the rust or the grime or the people struggling just to get by. My father built this company from nothing, Vanessa said, her back still to Carter. Immigrant parents, worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, started a small import business in a garage. By the time I was born, he'd turned it into a multi-million-dollar operation. She turned to face him. When I was 16, his business partner tried to force him out with fake documentation claiming my father had been embezzling. It was a complete lie, but the partner had better lawyers and deeper connections. Everyone told my father to settle, to take the buyout and walk away, to accept that sometimes the bad guys win. What did he do? He fought, spent every dollar we had on legal fees, mortgaged our house, worked himself into a heart attack at 53. Vanessa's voice went flat. He died 6 months before the court ruled in his favor. The silence in the office felt heavy. I'm sorry, Carter said. Don't be. He made his choice, and I respect it. But I also learned something watching him destroy himself fighting for justice. She came back to her desk. You need more than righteousness to win. You need resources, strategy, and people who know how to work the system. My father had none of those things. You do. I have you. You have my legal team, my investigators, my connections, and my very expensive desire to watch Richard Vaughn's empire collapse. Vanessa pulled a folder from her desk drawer, much thicker than the one Chloe had given him, and set it in front of Carter. This is everything we have so far. Timeline of the theft, documentation of your work, metadata analysis, witness statements from former Vaughn employees. Read it, then decide if you want to move forward. Carter stared at the folder without touching it. If I do this, he said slowly, if I actually go after Richard, how long does it take? 18 months? Maybe 2 years if he drags it out. And what happens to me during those 2 years? Vanessa didn't sugarcoat it. He'll make your life difficult. He'll try to discredit you professionally. He'll dig into every mistake you've ever made and put it in front of a judge. He'll make you regret starting this fight about 100 times. Great sales pitch. I'm not selling you anything. I'm telling you the truth. Vanessa met his eyes. But I'm also telling you that at the end of those 2 years, you'll own the Horizon Project again. Your name will be on it. Richard Vaughn will be professionally destroyed, and your son will grow up knowing his father didn't back down when someone tried to erase him. Carter picked up the folder. It was heavy, substantial, real in a way that made his chest tight. Can I take this with me? It's yours. He stood, tucking the folder under his arm. I need to think about it. Of course. Vanessa walked him to the door. Carter? For what it's worth, I think you're stronger than you believe you are. You survived losing your wife, losing your career, and rebuilding a life for your son from scratch. Fighting Richard Vaughn is going to be hard, but you've already done harder. Carter managed a weak smile. You don't know me well enough to say that. Maybe not, but I'm a good judge of character. She opened the door. Take your time, read the file. Call me when you're ready. Carter made it all the way to the elevator before his hands started shaking. He rode down to the lobby, walked out into the brutal February cold, and stood on the sidewalk trying to remember how to breathe. Inside the folder under his arm was proof that he wasn't crazy, that the project he'd poured his soul into hadn't just vanished into Richard Vaughn's empire, that somewhere in the digital ether, his work still existed with his name attached. The question was whether retrieving it was worth the cost. Carter walked for blocks without paying attention to where he was going, the folder pressed against his ribs like a shield, or a weapon, he wasn't sure which. His phone buzzed. Emma, again. He answered this time. You're alive, Emma said. I was starting to worry you'd done something stupid. Define stupid. Carter, I went to see her. Vanessa Sinclair. She has evidence, Emma. Real evidence that I designed the Horizon Project. Silence on the other end. And? Emma asked finally. And she wants me to sue Richard. Full legal warfare. 2 years of my life spent in depositions and court hearings and having every mistake I've ever made dragged into the light. But you'd win. Maybe. Probably. She seems to think so. Carter stopped walking and realized he was standing in front of Sarah's favorite coffee shop. The place they used to meet on Sunday mornings before Dylan was born. But winning means putting Dylan through hell first. Dylan's tougher than you think. He shouldn't have to be tough. He's 7. He should be worried about homework and soccer practice, not whether his dad's name is going to be in the papers because he's suing some billionaire architect. Emma was quiet for a moment. What would Sarah tell you to do? Carter closed his eyes. He could almost see her sitting at their usual table by the window, hands wrapped around a chai latte, smiling at him over the rim. She'd tell me to stop being scared and build something worth building, he said quietly. Then maybe listen to her. She's dead, Emma, and I'm still here trying to figure out how to keep going without her. I don't have the energy for this fight.
Yes, you do. You just don't want to admit it. Emma's voice softened. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your decision. But I watched you spend 3 years making yourself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into this safe little life where nothing could hurt you. And I've seen what that's done to you, Carter. You're not happy. You're just existing. The words stung because they were true. What if I lose? What if you win? Carter didn't have an answer for that.
He ended the call and went into the coffee shop, ordering Sarah's usual chai latte out of habit before realizing what he'd done. He almost canceled it, then didn't. The barista made it exactly the way Sarah always liked it, extra foam, cinnamon on top. Carter took it to the table by the window and sat. The folder sat in front of him, demanding to be opened. He pulled out the first page. It was a timeline. Dates and events laid out in clinical precision. September 2022. Carter Hayes begins preliminary design work on waterfront development project on personal laptop at home, while primary caretaker for terminally ill spouse. October 2022 to December 2022. Continued development of project. Multiple cloud backups automatically generated. Email correspondence with self-containing design iterations and notes. January 15th, 2023. Sarah Hayes deceased. January 22nd, 2023. Carter Hayes terminated from Vaughn and Associates for alleged performance issues. January 25th, 2023. Richard Vaughn accesses Carter Hayes' cloud storage using credentials obtained from HR records. Carter's hands tightened on the page. Richard had waited 3 days. 3 days after firing him to steal everything. The next page was security footage stills, grainy images of Richard sitting at a computer in his office, late at night, his face illuminated by the screen. The third page was metadata from the design files, creation dates, modification dates, author information. All of it pointed to Carter. None of it mentioned Richard Vaughn until January 25th, 2023, when he'd copied everything and changed the file properties to list himself as the creator. Carter read through page after page of evidence. Witness statements from former employees who'd heard Richard discussing the Hayes project before it became public. Email records showing Richard had no design work whatsoever on the Horizon project until after Carter's termination. Financial documents proving Richard had paid off 3 city officials to fast-track permits for a project he legally couldn't have designed yet. It was all there. Every piece of the puzzle Carter thought was lost. He finished the chai latte without tasting it and sat staring at the evidence spread across the table. This wasn't just about getting his project back. This was about proving that Richard Vaughn was a fraud who'd built an empire on stolen work. This was about making sure other architects didn't get destroyed the way Carter had. This was about Dylan growing up knowing his father had been the real genius, not the thief who erased him. Carter pulled out his phone and called Vanessa. She answered on the first ring. That was fast. I have conditions, Carter said. I'm listening. Dylan doesn't get dragged into this. Whatever happens, my son's name stays out of the papers. He doesn't testify. He doesn't get photographed. He stays protected. Agreed. I keep working. I need the income, and I'm not taking charity from you or anyone else. Understood. And when this is over, if we win, I don't want money. I want my name on the Horizon project. I want Richard Vaughn's name removed. That's it. Vanessa paused. Carter, the financial settlement alone could be worth tens of millions. You'd never have to work construction again. You could... I don't care about the money, Carter interrupted. Richard took my work and put his name on it. That's what I want back. Just that. Another pause. All right, Vanessa said finally.
I'll have my lawyers draw up an agreement reflecting your conditions. Can you come back to my office tomorrow morning? Yeah. Good. And Carter? What? You're doing the right thing. Carter ended the call and started gathering the papers back into the folder. He was doing something anyway. Whether it was right or stupid or suicidal, he'd figure out later. For now, he was done being quiet. For now, he was fighting back. He left the coffee shop and headed home, the folder under his arm feeling lighter than it should. Or maybe he was just standing straighter. Hard to tell the difference. When Carter picked Dylan up from school that afternoon, his son bounced into the truck full of stories about gym class and the spelling test he'd aced and how Marcus had shared his cheese crackers at lunch. Normal kid stuff. Normal life. Carter listened and responded and tried not to think about how much that normalcy was about to change. That night, after Dylan went to bed, Carter sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop for the first time in months. He logged into his old cloud storage account, the one he'd stopped using after Sarah died because looking at their shared photos hurt too much. The files were all still there. Sarah's ultrasound images from when she was pregnant with Dylan. Birthday videos. Photos from their honeymoon in Seattle. The digital detritus of a life that used to be. And buried in a folder marked Work, Personal, every single iteration of the Horizon project. Preliminary sketches. 3D models. Material specifications. Cost analyses. Notes to himself about sightlines and traffic flow and how to integrate public green space without sacrificing commercial viability. Hundreds of hours of work. Thousands of decisions. Every piece of his soul that he'd poured into creating something beautiful while Sarah was dying in the next room. Richard Vaughn had stolen all of it, had claimed it as his own, had built a billion-dollar empire on Carter's grief. Carter's hands curled into fists on the table. Tomorrow he'd go back to Vanessa's office and sign whatever needed signing. He'd meet with lawyers and investigators and start the long, brutal process of proving the truth. Tonight, he just sat there looking at the designs he'd created, remembering what it felt like to build something that mattered, remembering why he'd become an architect in the first place. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. My legal team wants to meet you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Bring any original files you still have access to. And Carter? Get some sleep. You're going to need it. Carter typed back a simple okay and closed his laptop. Sleep wasn't going to happen. He knew that. But he could at least lie down and pretend. He checked on Dylan one more time before going to his own room. His son was sprawled across the bed in that boneless way kids slept, completely at peace with the world. Carter stood in the doorway for a long time, memorizing this moment before everything got complicated. I'm going to fix this, he whispered. I don't know how, but I'm going to fix this. Dylan didn't stir. Carter closed the door and went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would mark the beginning of something he couldn't take back. Knowing that he'd made his choice. Knowing that sometimes the scariest thing you could do was stop accepting the world the way it was and start fighting for the world it should be. Even if the fight destroyed you, even if you lost, at least you'd gone down swinging. Carter showed up at Vanessa's office at 9:45 a.m. carrying a weathered laptop bag that had seen better days. The same security guard from yesterday gave him a look that suggested he still didn't belong here, but at least this time Carter's name was in the system. The elevator ride felt longer today, or maybe he was just more aware of how high he was climbing, how far there was to fall. Patricia was waiting when the doors opened, same efficient smile as before. Conference room B, she said. Ms. Sinclair and the legal team are already inside. She led him down a different hallway this time, past more glass-walled offices where people worked with the kind of focused intensity that came from billing $400 an hour. The conference room was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a table that could seat 20, and enough technology built into the walls to run a small country. Vanessa sat at the head of the table with 3 people Carter didn't recognize. 2 men in their 50s wearing suits that probably cost more than Carter's truck, and a woman maybe 40 with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Carter, Vanessa said, standing. Thanks for coming. This is Marcus Chen, lead litigation attorney, David Rothstein, corporate fraud specialist, and Jennifer Walsh, our lead investigator. Carter shook hands with each of them, acutely aware of his work boots on their expensive carpet. Please, sit, Marcus said, gesturing to a chair.
Can we get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm good. Marcus opened a leather portfolio and pulled out several documents. Ms. Sinclair brought us up to speed on your situation. Before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand what you're signing up for here. Vanessa gave me the overview. The overview doesn't cover it, Jennifer said bluntly. Richard Vaughn has been playing this game for 15 years. He knows every trick, every loophole, every way to make your life miserable while staying just inside legal boundaries. This isn't going to be clean. I didn't expect clean. Good. Because he's going to come after your credibility first. Your termination from Vaughn and Associates. He's going to claim it was performance-based, that you were unstable after your wife's death, that the work you claim to have done on the Horizon project was actually company property created on company time. Carter's jaw tightened. I worked on it at home, on my personal laptop, while taking care of my dying wife. We know, David said, and we have the documentation to prove it. But Richard's lawyers are going to argue that since you were employed by Vaughn and Associates at the time, anything you created, even at home, belongs to the company. That's not how it works. It's how it works if you signed the right employment contract. David slid a document across the table. This is your original employment agreement from 2019, Section 12, Subsection 4. Any designs, concepts, or intellectual property created by the employee during the term of employment become the exclusive property of Vaughn and Associates, regardless of where or when such work was performed. Carter stared at the clause. He remembered signing this contract, remembered thinking it was standard, remembered not having a lawyer review it because he'd been 26 and stupid and just excited to work for a prestigious firm. So everything I created belongs to Richard? Not quite, Marcus said. There's case law establishing that intellectual property created on personal time, using personal resources, for personal projects falls outside standard employment agreements. The challenge is proving the Horizon project was genuinely a personal endeavor, and not something you were developing for the company. I never showed it to anyone at work, never mentioned it. I was designing it for myself. Why? Jennifer asked. What? Why were you designing a billion-dollar waterfront development for yourself? What was the purpose? Carter looked down at his hands. My wife was dying. I couldn't control that. Couldn't fix it. Couldn't do anything except watch her get weaker every day. So I built something. Something I could control. Something beautiful and functional and real. It kept me sane. The room was quiet for a moment. That's good, Marcus said finally. That's a narrative a jury can understand. The grieving husband channeling his pain into creative work. Richard Vaughn stealing that work 3 days after you buried your wife. It plays badly for him. This isn't about playing to a jury, Carter said. This is about the truth. The truth matters, Vanessa interjected. But so does how we present it. Richard is going to paint you as a disgruntled former employee trying to cash in on his success. We need to make sure the judge and the public see what really happened. Carter pulled the hard drive from his laptop bag and set it on the table. This has every design file, every iteration, every note I made to myself at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep because Sarah was having a bad night. The timestamps will show exactly when I created each piece. Jennifer picked up the drive carefully, like it was made of glass. We'll need to have this forensically analyzed, create a chain of custody, verify the metadata hasn't been tampered with. I haven't touched those files in 3 years. I believe you, but we need to prove it in court. She slipped the drive into an evidence bag. I'll have our tech team start on this today. David leaned forward. Carter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there anything in your past, anything at all, that Richard could use against you? DUIs, arrests, financial problems, affairs, anything that could damage your credibility? No. I've been clean my whole life, never even got a speeding ticket. What about after your wife died? Depression, substance abuse, erratic behavior? Carter's hands clenched under the table. I was grieving. I saw a therapist for a few months, took some time to figure out how to be a single parent, but I didn't fall apart, if that's what you're asking. I'm asking because Richard's team will dig into every aspect of your life. They'll talk to your neighbors, your son's teachers, anyone who might have seen you at a low moment. They'll try to build a picture of someone unstable and unreliable. Let them dig, Carter said flatly. They won't find anything. Marcus made a note on his legal pad. All right, let's talk timeline. We'll file the initial complaint within the week. Richard will have 30 days to respond. Discovery will take several months. That's when both sides exchange evidence and take depositions. Then we'll likely face a motion to dismiss, which we'll fight. If we survive that, we're looking at trial in about 18 months. And during those 18 months, you live your life as normally as possible. Don't discuss the case with anyone except this team. Don't post about it on social media. Don't engage with reporters if they contact you. And absolutely do not have any direct contact with Richard Vaughn or anyone from his company. What about work? Keep your construction jobs. Maintain your routine. Show the court you're not doing this for money. You're doing this for justice. Marcus paused. But be prepared for Richard to make things difficult. He has connections all over Chicago. Contractors might suddenly stop calling. Projects might dry up. It's not legal retaliation, but it's hard to prove. I've dealt with worse. Vanessa spoke up. If your income takes a hit because of this case, we'll make sure you're covered. Off the books, no strings attached. Your son doesn't suffer because you're doing the right thing. I told you I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's making sure Richard can't starve you out before we get to trial. Her expression left no room for argument. Dylan's welfare isn't negotiable. Carter wanted to push back, but the truth was, he couldn't afford to lose work. Not with Dylan's school costs and rent and everything else. Pride was expensive, and he'd used up most of his these past 3 years. Fine, he said quietly, but I pay it back when this is over. We'll discuss that later, Vanessa said in a tone that meant they definitely wouldn't. Jennifer pulled out her own folder. I've been investigating Richard's operation for 6 months now. What we've found is a pattern going back to 2008. At least 9 architects whose work Richard claimed as his own. Most of them were junior employees, easy to intimidate. A few were contractors he hired for specific projects, then cut out of credit. You're the first case where we have solid digital evidence. What happened to the others? 2 took settlements and signed NDAs. 3 left the industry entirely. 1 moved to Europe. The rest just gave up. Jennifer met his eyes. Richard is very good at making people feel like fighting back is pointless. How does he keep getting away with it? Money, connections, and a complete lack of conscience. David tapped the table. He donates heavily to city council members, sits on the board of the Chicago Architecture Foundation, has lunch with the mayor twice a month. When someone accuses him of theft, his network closes ranks, and that person gets shut out of every major project in the city. So even if we win, I'm blacklisted. Possibly, Marcus said, but we're not just going after Richard in civil court. If we prove corporate fraud, the U.S. Attorney's Office might get involved. Criminal charges. That changes everything. Carter sat back in his chair, trying to process the scope of what they were describing. This wasn't just about getting his name on the Horizon project. This was about potentially sending Richard Vaughn to prison. I need to think about this, he said. You've already agreed to move forward, Vanessa reminded him. I agreed to sue for credit on my work. Criminal charges are different. That's... Carter ran a hand through his hair. That's a whole other level. It's the same case, Marcus said. If we prove Richard stole your intellectual property and profited from it, that's fraud. The criminal prosecution happens independent of our civil suit. But it makes me a witness in a criminal trial. It puts me even more in the spotlight. Yes. Carter stood and walked to the windows. The lake stretched out below, gray and choppy under the winter sky. From up here, the city looked orderly and manageable. You couldn't see the people struggling, couldn't see the broken parts. My wife used to say the hardest thing about dying wasn't the pain, he said quietly. It was knowing she'd miss Dylan growing up, that she wouldn't see him graduate or get married or become whoever he was going to be. She made me promise I'd give him a good life, a stable life. He turned back to the room. If I do this, if I go all the way with criminal charges and media attention and everything, I'm not giving him stability. I'm giving him chaos. You're giving him the truth, Vanessa said. You're showing him that when someone wrongs you, you don't just accept it. You fight back. Easy for you to say. You're not raising a 7-year-old alone. No, I'm running a multi-billion-dollar company while fighting off hostile takeover attempts and managing 300 employees. Vanessa's voice didn't rise, but there was steel underneath. I know about impossible choices, Carter. I make them every day. And I'm telling you that the hardest thing you can do is also the right thing. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I watched my father die fighting for what was right, and I've spent every day since wondering if I would have had his courage. You have that chance right now. Don't waste it. The words hung in the air. Carter looked at the legal team, at their expensive suits and confident expressions. They made it sound simple. File the complaint, present the evidence, win the case. But they weren't the ones who'd have to explain to Dylan why strangers were taking their picture, why other kids at school might say mean things, why their quiet life was suddenly public property. I need to talk to my son, Carter said. Marcus frowned. Carter, Dylan's 7. He can't. I'm not asking his permission. I'm telling him what's happening and why. Carter grabbed his jacket. This affects his life too. He deserves to understand. At least let us finish him. We're done for today. Carter headed for the door, then paused. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision, final decision. But right now I need to go pick up my kid from school and be his father, not a plaintiff in some corporate lawsuit. He left before anyone could argue. The elevator ride down felt faster than going up. Carter's heart was racing, his hands shaking slightly as he jabbed the button for the lobby. Everything the legal team had said made sense. The case was solid. The evidence was there. They could win. But winning meant dragging Dylan through hell first. The security guard nodded at him on the way out. Carter barely noticed. He walked for blocks again, trying to clear his head. The cold helped. The physical discomfort gave him something concrete to focus on, besides the impossible choice sitting on his shoulders. His phone rang. Emma. Please tell me you didn't just walk out of a meeting with Vanessa Sinclair's legal team, she said when he answered. How did you? She called me. Said you bolted and she's worried you're getting cold feet. I'm not getting cold feet. I'm trying to figure out how to do this without destroying Dylan's childhood. Dylan will be fine. You don't know that. Neither do you. You're catastrophizing, Carter, imagining the worst possible outcome and treating it like it's inevitable. Carter stopped walking. Richard Vaughn has spent 15 years crushing anyone who challenges him. Why would I be different? Because you have something none of those other people had. You have Vanessa Sinclair in your corner, and from what I've read about her, she doesn't lose. There's always a first time. Emma was quiet for a moment. What are you really scared of? The question hit deeper than Carter expected. I'm scared of losing, he admitted. I'm scared of putting Dylan through 18 months of hell and then having a judge rule that Richard gets to keep everything. I'm scared of fighting this battle and ending up with nothing except more pain. So you'd rather just accept defeat now? I'd rather protect my son. By teaching him to roll over when someone steals from him? Great lesson, Carter. That's not fair. Life's not fair. You know that better than anyone. Emma's voice softened. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I will say this. Dylan's watching you. He's watching how you handle this. And right now he's learning that when things get scary, you run away. I'm not running away. I'm being smart. You're being scared. There's a difference. Carter didn't have an answer for that. He ended the call and checked the time. 2:15 p.m. Dylan got out of school at 3. That gave Carter 45 minutes to figure out what the hell he was doing. He ended up at a park bench near Dylan's school, watching parents and nannies gather for pickup. Normal people living normal lives. Nobody suing billionaires or fighting corporate fraud cases or trying to decide if justice was worth the cost. A woman sat down on the other end of the bench. Late 30s, expensive coat, phone glued to her ear. She was arguing with someone about a contract deadline, her voice sharp and professional. Carter listened without meaning to. I don't care if it's inconvenient, the woman was saying. We had an agreement and they violated it. So we either renegotiate or we walk. Those are the options. She paused, listening. No, I'm not being unreasonable. I'm being clear about our boundaries. They don't get to change the terms just because it suits them better now. Another pause. Then they'll learn an expensive lesson about keeping their word, won't they? She ended the call and sat back, exhaling hard. Carter found himself speaking before thinking. Tough negotiation? The woman glanced at him, surprised. Yeah, a client trying to back out of a contract because they found someone cheaper. Tale as old as time. You walking away? Probably. I don't work with people who don't honor their commitments. She tilted her head. Why do you ask? Just wondering if standing your ground is always worth it. Depends on what you're standing for. She checked her phone. But in my experience, the minute you let someone take advantage of you, they'll keep doing it. Better to draw a line early. Even if drawing that line costs you more than just accepting it? The woman considered this. Short term, maybe it costs more. Long term, you save yourself a lot of pain by not being someone's doormat. She stood, gathering her bag. Good luck with whatever you're deciding. But for what it's worth, most people regret the things they didn't do more than the things they did. She walked away before Carter could respond. He sat there turning her words over in his mind. Most people regret the things they didn't do. Was that true? Would he regret not fighting Richard more than he'd regret the consequences of fighting? The school bell rang. Kids started pouring out of the building in that chaotic wave of backpacks and shouting and endless energy. Carter stood and walked to the pickup area, scanning for Dylan's familiar blue jacket. His son appeared in the crowd, laughing with a friend about something. When he spotted Carter, his whole face lit up. "Dad, guess what happened in science today?" "What happened?" "We got to dissect flowers and look at the parts under a microscope, and it was so cool. There's this thing called a stamen that..." Dylan talked nonstop all the way to the truck, describing pistils and petals and how flowers reproduce. Carter listened and made appropriate sounds of interest while his brain kept circling back to the decision he needed to make. At home, Dylan dumped his backpack and headed for the TV. "Homework first," Carter said. "But I don't have any." "You always have reading," Dylan groaned but grabbed his book and flopped onto the couch. Carter went to the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients for dinner. Pasta. Simple. Dylan would actually eat it. While the water boiled, Carter leaned against the counter and watched his son read. Dylan was so absorbed in the story he didn't notice being observed. His lips moved slightly as he read, a habit Sarah used to have. The resemblance hit Carter like a fist sometimes. The way Dylan scrunched his nose when concentrating. The way he laughed with his whole body. Little pieces of Sarah living on in their son. What would she want him to do? The question had been circling his brain for 2 days now, and he still didn't have an answer. Sarah had been practical, level-headed. She would have looked at the risks and the rewards and made a decision based on logic, not emotion. But she'd also been fierce about fairness, about not letting people get away with wrong just because fighting back was hard. Carter drained the pasta and started on the sauce. "Dylan, can you come here for a minute?" His son appeared in the kitchen doorway. "What?" "I need to talk to you about something." Dylan's expression went cautious. "Am I in trouble?" "No, nothing like that. Just come sit." They sat at the kitchen table and Carter tried to figure out how to explain corporate fraud to a 7-year-old. "You remember when I used to work at that big architecture company?" he started. "Before Mom died." "Right. Well, while I was there, I designed a really important building, a huge project on the waterfront. I worked on it at home, on my own time, because it was something special I was creating." Dylan nodded, listening. "When Mom died and I left the company, my old boss stole that design. He told everyone he created it, and he made a lot of money from my work. That's not fair." "No, it's not. And for a long time, I just accepted it because I was too tired to fight, and I needed to focus on taking care of you." "But now you want to fight?" Carter met his son's eyes. "There's a lawyer, a very powerful woman, who has proof that I created that building. She wants to help me sue my old boss and get credit for my work. But if I do that, it's going to take a long time, and it might be really hard on both of us." "Hard how?" "People might say mean things about me in the news. Other kids might ask you questions. Things might get complicated and confusing." Dylan was quiet, processing this. "Would we have to move?" he asked finally. "No, we'd stay right here." "Would I have to change schools?" "No." "Then what's the hard part?" Carter smiled despite himself. "Life might just be messy for a while. More stressful. Less predictable." Dylan shrugged. "Life's already kind of messy. You cry sometimes when you think I'm asleep. And you get sad when we see moms picking up their kids from school. Adding more mess doesn't seem that different." The casual observation knocked the air from Carter's lungs. "You hear me crying?" "Sometimes. It's okay. I cry too. I miss Mom." Carter reached across the table and took his son's hand. "I'm sorry you have to deal with that. It's not your fault. It's just how things are." Dylan squeezed his hand. "But if someone stole your building, you should get it back. That's what you always tell me when kids take my stuff at school. This is more complicated than playground rules, buddy. Not really. Someone took something that was yours. You should take it back. The simplicity of it was startling. Carter had been thinking about this as impossible choice between justice and stability, between fighting and protecting, between what was right and what was safe. But Dylan saw it clearly. Someone stole something, and you get it back. What if getting it back means things are hard for a while? Carter asked. Then they're hard. We've been through hard before. Dylan pulled his hand free and stood up. Can we eat now? I'm starving. Just like that, the conversation was over. For Dylan, the answer was obvious. Carter served dinner and they ate while Dylan talked about his friend Marcus's upcoming birthday party and whether he should ask for a new bike for his own birthday in April. Normal kid concerns. Normal life. After Dylan went to bed, Carter sat at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand. He pulled up Vanessa's number and typed out a message. I'm in. File the complaint. I'll do whatever needs to be done. He stared at the text for a solid minute before hitting send. The response came back almost immediately. Good. We'll start first thing Monday morning. Get some rest this weekend. It's going to be a long fight. Carter set down his phone and sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the apartment settle around him. He'd just committed to a legal battle that would consume the next 2 years of his life. That would put him under a microscope. That would test every bit of strength he had left. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was moving forward instead of just surviving. And maybe that was worth the cost. Maybe. The complaint hit Richard Vaughn's desk on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a process server who caught him leaving his favorite breakfast spot in River North. Carter knew this because Jennifer called him 20 minutes later with the news, her voice carrying barely concealed satisfaction. He looked like someone kicked his dog, she said, stood on the sidewalk reading the first page over and over like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Carter was replacing a rotted section of deck on a house in Lincoln Park when the call came. He set down his drill and stepped away from the noise. What happens now? Now he calls his lawyers. They file a response within 30 days. Then discovery starts and things get messy. Jennifer paused. How are you holding up? I'm fine. You're allowed to be nervous, you know. I said I'm fine. He wasn't fine. He'd barely slept since sending that text to Vanessa. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Richard's face from the security footage, that cold calculation as he'd stolen Carter's files. Every morning he woke up wondering if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. But fine was easier than honest. The first 2 weeks after filing were eerily quiet. Carter kept expecting something dramatic. Reporters on his doorstep, angry phone calls, threats from Richard's lawyers. Instead, life just continued. He worked his construction jobs, picked Dylan up from school, made dinner, helped with homework. The mundane rhythm of existence that had nothing to do with billion-dollar lawsuits. Then the Chicago Tribune ran the story. Emma called him at 6 a.m. on a Thursday, her voice tight with something Carter couldn't identify. Have you seen the paper? I don't read the paper. What's wrong? They did a piece on the lawsuit, front page of the business section. There's a picture of you. Carter's stomach dropped. What picture? Looks like it's from when you worked at Vaughn and Associates. You're wearing a suit, standing in front of some rendering. You look... Emma paused. You look happy. Carter remembered that photo. Sarah had taken it during the opening of a small community center he'd helped design early in his career. Before Dylan. Before cancer. Before everything fell apart. He looked happy because he had been happy. What does the article say? Hold on, I'll read it. Paper rustled on the other end. Former Vaughn and Associates architect Carter Hayes has filed suit against prominent developer Richard Vaughn, alleging theft of intellectual property related to the award-winning Horizon project. Hayes claims he designed the billion-dollar waterfront development while employed at the firm, and that Vaughn misappropriated the work after Hayes' termination in 2023. The suit, backed by legal representation from Sinclair Industries, seeks damages and public acknowledgement of Hayes' authorship. Vaughn's office declined to comment on pending litigation. Emma stopped reading. There's more, she said quietly. They mentioned Sarah. They mentioned that you were terminated shortly after her death. They basically lay out your whole life. Great. Carter,
I have to get Dylan to school. I'll call you later. He hung up before Emma could push further. Dylan was eating cereal when Carter came back into the kitchen, oblivious to the fact that his father's private pain was now public consumption. You okay, Dad? You look weird. I'm fine. Finish your breakfast. At Dylan's school, Carter noticed the looks, other parents whispering, a mom he vaguely recognized from PTA meetings quickly looking away when he made eye contact, the kind of attention that made his skin crawl. One father Carter had talked to a few times at pickup approached as Dylan ran inside. Saw the article, the man said. That's rough, man. Going after Richard Vaughn. Yeah, my brother's an architect. Says everyone in the industry knows Vaughn's a snake, but nobody's been able to prove it. The man clapped Carter on the shoulder. Good luck. Hope you nail him. The unexpected support caught Carter off guard. Thanks. Seriously, guys like that need to be held accountable. Carter drove to his job site feeling slightly less alone. Maybe this wouldn't be complete social suicide. Maybe some people actually understood. That optimism lasted until he got a call from the contractor who'd hired him for the deck job. Carter, hey, listen, I've got some bad news. Carter's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Let me guess. You're letting me go. It's not personal, it's just Richard Vaughn sits on the board of the Contractors Association. I can't afford to have him blackball me over this. I understand. I really am sorry, man. You do good work. Sure. Carter hung up and sat in his truck, staring at nothing. So it was starting. The professional isolation Jennifer had warned about. Richard flexing his connections to make sure Carter couldn't earn a living. His phone rang again. Another contractor. Same story, different words. Then a third call. This one from a property manager who'd used Carter for repair work. All apologetic. All cutting ties. By noon, Carter had lost 3 jobs and 2 potential contracts that had been in negotiation. He called Vanessa. They're blacklisting me, he said flatly. Every contractor in the city is dropping me because they're scared of Richard. I know. Jennifer's been monitoring the calls. You've been monitoring my phone? We're monitoring Richard's network, which includes tracking who he's been contacting over the past 48 hours. Vanessa's voice was calm, unbothered. He reached out to 17 different industry contacts yesterday, all of them people you've worked with or solicited work from. That's witness tampering or intimidation or something illegal. It's technically legal as long as he doesn't explicitly threaten anyone. He's just letting people know about pending litigation and suggesting they might want to distance themselves from potential legal complications. So I'm just supposed to accept going broke? No, you're supposed to let me handle it. Something in Vanessa's tone shifted. I've been making some calls on my own this morning. Sinclair Industries has several construction projects launching in the next 6 months. We need reliable contractors for renovation work. Interested? Carter sat up straighter. You're offering me work? I'm offering you the same rate you were making before, plus benefits since you'll be contracting directly with us. Full-time hours if you want them. The projects are legitimate. We're not creating fake work. We actually need the labor. Vanessa, I said I didn't want charity. And I said this isn't charity. It's me making sure Richard can't use economic pressure to force you into settling. She paused. Also, you're good at what you do. I've seen your work. Emma sent me photos of that deck you built for her last summer. You have an eye for detail most contractors lack. Emma sent you photos? She's protective of you. It's sweet. Carter rubbed his face. I can't take your money just because Richard's trying to starve me out. You can and you will, because otherwise you're letting him win without a fight. This is how billionaires operate, Carter. They don't just beat you in court. They destroy your ability to survive long enough to get to court. I'm evening the playing field. By giving me a job I didn't earn. You earned it by being the first person in 15 years brave enough to challenge Richard Vaughn in public. The job is just compensation for that courage. Vanessa's voice softened slightly. Let me help you, please. The please got him. What kind of work? Renovation on a building in the West Loop we just acquired. Needs complete interior overhaul. You'd have a crew of 3 to manage, and we'd need it done in 4 months. I've never managed a crew that size. Then learn. You're smart. You'll figure it out. She paused. The offer's open as long as you need it. Think about it. She hung up before Carter could argue further. He sat in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store, weighing his options.
Keep looking for independent contracting work that might not exist anymore, or accept Vanessa's offer and feel like he was taking advantage of her generosity. Pride versus practicality. Sarah would have told him to take the job, would have said that pride didn't pay rent or put food on the table, would have pointed out that sometimes accepting help was the smart choice, not the weak one. Carter pulled up Vanessa's number and typed out a text. "I'll take the job. When do I start?" The response came back immediately. "Monday. I'll have Patricia send you the details." That weekend, the story grew. The Tribune article got picked up by industry blogs and local news sites. Carter's phone started getting calls from reporters asking for interviews. He ignored all of them, per Marcus's instructions. On Saturday morning, someone knocked on his apartment door. Carter opened it to find a reporter and a photographer standing in the hallway. "Mr. Hayes, I'm with Chicago Magazine. I was hoping we could talk about your case against Richard Vaughn." No comment. "Just a few questions about the Horizon project," and Carter closed the door in their faces. Through the peephole, he watched them linger for a minute before finally leaving. His hands were shaking. Having strangers show up at his home felt like a violation, even though some rational part of his brain knew this was inevitable. "Who was that?" Dylan asked from the couch. "Nobody. Just someone with the wrong apartment." Dylan accepted this without question and went back to his cartoons. That afternoon, Emma came over with groceries and a determination to talk about things Carter didn't want to discuss. "You're avoiding my calls," she said, unpacking milk and eggs into his fridge. "I've been busy." "You've been hiding." Emma turned to face him. "How bad is it?" "I lost most of my work. Reporters are showing up at my door. Other parents at Dylan's school are looking at me like I'm either a hero or an idiot, and I'm not sure which is worse." "But you're moving forward." Vanessa gave me a job, managing a renovation crew for one of her buildings. Emma's expression brightened. "Carter, that's great. It's charity. It's opportunity. There's a difference." She closed the fridge and leaned against it. "You've spent 3 years making yourself small, taking whatever scraps of work you could find, never asking for more, never expecting better. Maybe it's time to stop treating yourself like you don't deserve good things. I don't deserve special treatment because I'm suing my former boss. You deserve to be paid fairly for honest work. That's not special treatment. That's basic human dignity." Carter didn't have an answer for that. Emma sighed and pulled him into a hug. "You're doing the right thing. I know it's scary and messy and nothing feels certain, but you're doing the right thing." Carter hugged her back, throat tight. "What if I'm not strong enough for this?" "Then you lean on those people who love you until you are." She pulled back and looked him in the eye. "You're not alone, Carter. Stop acting like you are." Monday morning, Carter showed up at the West Loop property at 7 a.m. sharp. The building was a 6-story former factory that Sinclair Industries had purchased for conversion into mixed-use office and retail space. The interior was gutted down to concrete and steel, everything ripped out to bare bones. A site supervisor named Miguel met him at the entrance with a clipboard and a skeptical expression. "You're Hayes?" "That's me." "You managed renovation crews before?" "No, but I'm a fast learner." Miguel looked him over, clearly unimpressed with what he saw. "Your crew's already inside, Carlos, Tommy, and Jess. They've been doing this work for years, so listen to them. Don't try to pretend you know more than you do." "Understood." Miguel handed him the clipboard. "Here's the scope of work for this week. Demo's done. Now we're framing out the new walls and running electrical. Stay on schedule and we'll get along fine." The crew was exactly what Miguel described. 3 people who knew their jobs and didn't need a manager telling them what to do. Carlos was maybe 50, with the quiet competence of someone who'd been in construction his whole life. Tommy was younger, late 20s, all tattoos and nervous energy. Jess was the only woman, early 40s, and she immediately established herself as the one actually running the show. "You the new boss?" she asked when Carter introduced himself. "I'm supposed to be managing the project." "But you've never managed a crew." "No." "At least you're honest." Jess jerked her thumb toward the interior. "Here's how this works. We do the actual labor. You handle schedules, materials, and keeping the client off our backs. Don't micromanage and we won't have problems." Fair enough. It was the easiest working relationship Carter had stumbled into in years. The crew didn't care about his lawsuit or his history with Richard Vaughn. They cared about getting the work done efficiently and getting paid on time. Everything else was noise. Carter fell into the rhythm of the job. Mornings were spent on site making sure materials arrived when needed and the crew had what they required. Afternoons were dedicated to paperwork, scheduling, and coordination with other contractors handling plumbing and HVAC. It was different from the solo work he'd been doing, but there was something satisfying about managing the larger project. The first week passed without incident. The second week, Richard's lawyers filed their response to the complaint. Marcus called Carter on a Wednesday evening while he was helping Dylan with math homework. "We've got their answer," Marcus said. "It's about what we expected. They're claiming everything you designed was work for hire under your employment contract. They're also alleging you had performance issues and were terminated for cause." "What kind of performance issues?" "Attendance problems, missed deadlines, substandard work quality. They're painting a picture of someone struggling after a personal tragedy and failing to meet professional standards." Carter's jaw clenched. "That's complete garbage." "I know, but they're going to bring in supervisors who will testify you were frequently absent or distracted during your wife's illness, which, to be clear, is understandable and human, but they'll frame it as professional incompetence. So they're using Sarah's death against me." "Essentially, yes." Carter closed his eyes. "When do we respond?" "We've already started drafting our reply. But Carter, there's something else." Marcus paused. "They've subpoenaed your medical records, therapy sessions, prescriptions, everything from the 6 months after Sarah died." "They can't do that." "They can if they're arguing you were mentally unstable and therefore unreliable about the timeline of when you created the Horizon Project designs." "I saw a therapist because my wife died and I needed help coping. That doesn't make me unstable." "I agree. But they're going to use it to question your credibility. We'll fight the subpoena, but you should know it's coming." After hanging up, Carter sat at the kitchen table staring at Dylan's math worksheet without seeing it. They were going to drag his grief into court, turn the worst period of his life into evidence of mental incompetence, use his pain as a weapon against him. "Dad?" Dylan's voice pulled him back. "You stopped helping." "Sorry, buddy. Where were we?" "Problem 7, I don't get fractions." Carter forced himself to focus. "Okay, so if you have one pizza and you cut it into 8 slices," they worked through the math together while Carter's brain spun in circles. He'd known this would be invasive. Jennifer had warned him, but knowing it intellectually was different from feeling it emotionally. After putting Dylan to bed, Carter called Vanessa. She answered on the second ring. "Marcus told you about the medical records?" "Yeah." "I'm sorry, I know that feels like a violation." "It is a violation, but apparently it's a legal one." Carter paced his small living room. "Is this normal? Do they always go after mental health records? In cases like this?" "Yes. They're trying to establish you're not a credible witness to your own life." Vanessa's voice carried an edge Carter hadn't heard before. "Richard's playing the only card he has left, making you look unstable and unreliable." "What if it works?" "It won't. We have documentation proving you created those designs. Your mental state doesn't change the metadata or the timestamps or the fact that Richard accessed your files after your termination. But it changes how a judge sees me." "Maybe. Or maybe it makes you more sympathetic. The grieving widower whose work was stolen during the worst moment of his life. That's not a bad narrative, Carter." He hated how transactional she made it sound, like his pain was just another piece of evidence to deploy strategically. "I don't want to be a sympathetic figure," he said. "I want to be someone who designed a building and deserves credit for it." "You can be both." Carter stopped pacing. "Do you ever feel guilty about this? Using my life as ammunition to take down Richard?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Carter wondered if the call had dropped. "Yes," Vanessa said finally. "I feel guilty that I'm asking you to relive trauma you've worked hard to move past. I feel guilty that I dragged you into a fight you weren't looking for. I feel guilty that this is going to hurt before it gets better. But you're doing it anyway. Because sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing. And because you deserve justice, even if getting it requires walking through fire first." Carter sat down on the couch. "What if I don't make it through the fire? Then I'll pull you out myself." Vanessa's voice was firm. "You're not doing this alone, Carter. I meant what I said about having your back. That includes the parts where this gets ugly." They talked for another 20 minutes about logistics and legal strategy and things Carter barely understood. When he finally hung up, it was past midnight and exhaustion was pulling at his bones. But he also felt steadier, like maybe he could actually survive this. The next 2 months were a blur of depositions and document review and meetings with lawyers. Carter gave his testimony over the course of 3 days, walking through every detail of how he'd created the Horizon Project. Marcus was relentless in preparation, making Carter repeat his story over and over until it was burned into his brain. "They're going to try to catch you in inconsistencies," Marcus explained. "Any detail that changes between now and trial becomes ammunition, so we need your story locked down." Richard's deposition happened in late May. Carter wasn't allowed to attend, but Jennifer gave him a summary afterward. "He's smooth," she said, completely calm, utterly confident. He claims the Horizon Project was developed through collaborative sessions with multiple architects at his firm. Says your contribution was minimal, maybe some preliminary sketches that the team refined into the final design. That's a lie. I know, and we'll prove it, but he's good at lying, very believable. Carter thought about that a lot over the following weeks. How Richard could sit in a deposition and calmly claim credit for work he'd stolen. How he could rewrite history without flinching. It took a specific kind of person to do that. Someone completely disconnected from normal human conscience. Work on the West Loop building progressed steadily. The crew hit their milestones, and Carter found he actually enjoyed the management side of construction. There was satisfaction in coordinating moving pieces, solving problems before they became crises, seeing the project take shape through collective effort. Jess pulled him aside one afternoon in June while they were reviewing the electrical plans. "You're pretty good at this," she said. "At what?" "Managing. Most people either micromanage or completely check out. You found a middle ground." "Thanks, I think." "It's a compliment. You should consider doing this full-time, project management. There's good money in it, and you've got the temperament." Carter hadn't thought about his future beyond surviving the lawsuit. The idea that he might actually build a career out of this, something different from solo contracting but still connected to construction, felt strange and hopeful in equal measure. "I'll think about it," he said. That evening, he picked Dylan up from his last day of second grade. His son came running out of the building with a folder full of end-of-year artwork and a smile that could power the city. "I'm in third grade now," Dylan announced, like it was a personal achievement on par with climbing Everest. "You are? How does it feel?" "The same, but also different." They went to Dylan's favorite pizza place to celebrate, and for 2 hours Carter was just a dad having dinner with his kid. No lawyers, no depositions, no Richard Vaughn, just normal life. Walking back to the truck, Dylan slipped his hand into Carter's. "Dad, are you still doing that thing with the building you made?" "The lawsuit?" "Yeah, buddy, still happening. Is it hard?" "Sometimes." "Are we going to be okay?" Carter squeezed his son's hand. "Yeah, we're going to be okay." "Good." Dylan swung their joined hands between them. "Because I don't want to move or change schools or anything. We're not going anywhere, I promise." It was a promise Carter hoped he could keep, because despite Vanessa's assurances and Marcus's confidence, there was still a very real possibility they'd lose. That Richard's lawyers would convince a judge that employment contracts trumped creative ownership. That Carter would end up with nothing except legal bills and a destroyed reputation. But looking at his son's trusting face, Carter couldn't voice those fears. So he just held Dylan's hand and pretended certainty he didn't feel. Later that night, after Dylan was asleep, Carter sat on his apartment's tiny balcony and called Vanessa. "Do you ever doubt we'll win?" he asked. "Every case has uncertainty, but I believe in our evidence." "That's not what I asked." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I have doubts. Richard's smart and connected and ruthless. There's a timeline where he wins through sheer attrition. Comforting. But there's also a timeline where he gets exactly what he deserves, where you walk out of that courthouse with your name restored and his reputation in ruins, and I think that timeline is more likely." "Based on what?" "Based on the fact that we have truth on our side. And while that doesn't always win, it wins more often than lies do." Carter wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that justice was more than just a word lawyers threw around to make clients feel better. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For all of this. I know I haven't said that enough."
You don't need to thank me. I'm doing this because it's right, not because I expect gratitude. Still, you've put your reputation behind this case. That means something. So have you. That means more. They talked until Carter's phone battery started dying, about nothing and everything. Vanessa told him about growing up with immigrant parents who valued education above all else, about the pressure of inheriting her father's company at 28 after his death, about learning to be ruthless in business while trying to stay human underneath. Carter told her about meeting Sarah in college, about their tiny wedding with 12 people in attendance, about the way she'd laughed at his terrible jokes even while dying. It was the most honest conversation Carter had with anyone since Sarah passed. When he finally went to bed after 2 a.m., he felt less alone than he had in years. And maybe that was dangerous. Maybe he was attaching too much importance to Vanessa's presence in his life. But at that moment, he didn't care. Summer turned to fall, and the West Loop project reached completion ahead of schedule. Carter stood in the renovated building on a September afternoon, watching afternoon light pour through the new windows, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: pride in work well done. Jess walked up beside him, wiping dust from her hands. "Not bad for your first management gig," she said. "Couldn't have done it without the crew." "Yeah, but you kept us organized. That counts for something." She glanced at him. "Sinclair's got 2 more properties lined up for renovation. Word is they want you leading both projects." Carter turned to her. "How do you know that?" "Miguel told me. He's impressed with how you handled this one. Says you've got instincts most managers take years to develop." The compliment settled warm in Carter's chest. For 3 years, he'd been convinced his career was over, that the best he could hope for was scraping together enough small jobs to keep Dylan fed. The idea that he might actually build something new, not reclaim what was lost, but create something different entirely, felt almost impossible to accept. His phone rang. Marcus. "We've got a court date," Marcus said without preamble. "January 15th, Judge Morrison's courtroom." Carter's stomach dropped. "That's 4 months away." "I know. Richard's team tried to push for a delay, but Morrison denied it. She wants this resolved." Marcus paused. "This is good news, Carter. It means we're actually going to trial." "Right. Good news." After hanging up, Carter stood alone in the empty building and tried to process what was coming. 4 months until everything he'd been building toward either vindicated him or destroyed what was left of his life. The fall passed in a blur of trial preparation. Marcus put Carter through mock cross-examinations that left him exhausted and doubting everything. Jennifer compiled witness lists and evidence exhibits. David worked on legal arguments that Carter only half understood. And through it all, Vanessa was there. Not just as the CEO funding his legal team, but as someone who called to check how he was holding up, who showed up at the construction site with coffee when she knew he'd had a rough deposition, who understood without being told when Carter needed to talk and when he needed silence. It was becoming harder to pretend this was just a professional relationship. One evening in October, Carter picked Dylan up from soccer practice to find Vanessa waiting by his truck. She was dressed casually for once, jeans and a leather jacket, and she was holding 2 cups from the coffee shop near Dylan's school. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him one. Dylan's eyes went wide. "Are you Dad's girlfriend?" "Dylan?" Carter's face went hot. "I'm a friend," Vanessa said smoothly. "Your dad's been working really hard and friends help each other out." "Oh." Dylan looked disappointed. "Dad needs a girlfriend. Aunt Emma says so." "Your Aunt Emma says a lot of things," Carter muttered. "Get in the truck, buddy." After dropping Dylan at Emma's for the evening, she was taking him to a movie. Carter and Vanessa ended up walking along the lakefront as the sun set over the city. The air had that sharp October edge, cold enough to see your breath, but not quite freezing. "Sorry about Dylan," Carter said. "He doesn't have a filter." "He's 7. He's not supposed to," Vanessa smiled. "Besides, Emma's not wrong. You do need someone." "I need to survive the next 4 months. Everything else can wait." "Can it, though?" Vanessa stopped walking and turned to face him. "Carter, what happens after the trial? Win or lose, what's your plan?" "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Maybe you should." The question sat heavy between them. Carter had been so focused on getting through each day that he hadn't considered what came after, what his life looked like once the lawsuit was resolved.
I don't know, he admitted. Keep working construction, I guess. Keep raising Dylan. Figure out how to exist without all of this consuming every thought. What about the Horizon project? If you win, your name goes back on it. You become the architect who designed one of Chicago's most celebrated developments. Firms will want to hire you. You could rebuild your career. I'm not sure I want that anymore. Vanessa studied him. What do you want? Carter looked out at the lake, watching the last rays of sunlight turn the water bronze and gold. I want Dylan to grow up happy. I want to do work that matters without destroying myself in the process. I want to stop feeling like I'm constantly one mistake away from everything falling apart. That's not too much to ask. Feels like it sometimes. Vanessa moved closer, close enough that Carter could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. You're stronger than you think. You've survived things that would have broken most people. Don't sell yourself short. I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn. There's not much difference. Carter laughed despite himself. Is that your business philosophy? Stubbornness equals strength? It's gotten me this far. She met his eyes. And it'll get you through January. They stood there as the light faded, two people who'd been carrying their own weight for so long they'd forgotten how to share the burden. Carter wanted to say something about what her support had meant, about how she'd become more important to his life than he'd intended, about how terrifying it was to care about someone again after losing Sarah. But the words wouldn't come, so he just stood there, and Vanessa stood beside him, and somehow that was enough. November brought the first snow and increased pressure from Richard's legal team. They offered a settlement, $300,000 and a confidential agreement that Carter would never publicly claim authorship of the Horizon project. Marcus called him on a Monday morning to discuss it. It's not a bad offer, Marcus said carefully. That's a significant amount of money. It would set you up financially, let you focus on Dylan without worrying about work. But I'd have to stay silent. Yes, the NDA is ironclad. You couldn't tell anyone you designed the project. Richard keeps the credit, and you get paid to disappear. Carter was quiet for a long moment. $300,000 would change his life, would pay for Dylan's college, would let him stop worrying about making rent every month, would be the practical, sensible choice. No, he said. Carter, I said no. This isn't about money. It never was. Then what is it about? Carter thought about Dylan asking why someone would steal his building, about the simple clarity of childhood logic that said, stolen things should be returned. It's about my son knowing his father didn't back down when someone tried to erase him. It's about not teaching Dylan that integrity has a price tag. He paused. Tell Richard his money doesn't interest me. I'll see him in court. Marcus was quiet for a beat. All right. I'll relay your decision. And Marcus? Thanks for asking instead of just telling me to take it. You're the client. This is your call to make. After hanging up, Carter felt lighter. The money would have been easy, but easy wasn't always right. He told Vanessa about the settlement offer that evening over dinner at a quiet restaurant in Andersonville. They'd fallen into a rhythm of meeting once or twice a week, ostensibly to discuss the case, but increasingly just to talk. Richard's getting desperate, Vanessa said. $300,000 is substantial. He wouldn't offer that unless he was worried. Good. He should be worried. Carter, I need to tell you something. Vanessa set down her fork. Jennifer found two more architects who worked for Richard, both willing to testify that he stole their designs too. That's great. It also means the case is bigger than we initially thought. The U.S. Attorney's Office contacted me last week. They're considering criminal fraud charges against Richard and his company. Carter's chest tightened. You're saying this could go federal? It already is federal. The question is whether they pursue prosecution. Vanessa leaned forward. If they do, you'll be a key witness. It'll mean more depositions, more testimony, more of your life under scrutiny. But it means Richard actually faces consequences. Real ones, not just losing a civil case. Yes, but it also means this drags out longer. Potentially years longer. Carter sat back, processing this. He'd committed to fighting for justice, but he hadn't imagined it extending beyond the January trial date. The thought of years more of this was exhausting. What do you think I should do? He asked. I think you should do what you've been doing. Tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Vanessa reached across the table and took his hand. But
I also think you should know that whatever you decide, I'm here. This isn't just a case to me anymore, Carter. You're not just a client." The admission hung in the air between them. "I know," Carter said quietly. "You're not just my lawyer either." "Good, because I was worried I was alone in that." They sat there holding hands across the table, and for the first time since Sarah died, Carter let himself imagine what it might feel like to open his heart again, to trust someone with the broken pieces, to believe that maybe loss wasn't the end of the story. December came with bitter cold and the final stretch of trial preparation. Carter spent his days working and his evenings reviewing testimony with Marcus. Dylan was struggling with the attention at school. Other kids had seen the news coverage, and some of them had questions their parents had clearly coached them to ask. "Marcus from my class says his dad says you're suing a rich guy," Dylan reported one afternoon. "He wanted to know if we're going to be rich too." "What did you tell him?" "That it's not about money. It's about making sure bad people don't win." Dylan looked up at Carter. "That's right, isn't it?" "Yeah, buddy, that's exactly right." Christmas was quiet. Just Carter, Dylan, and Emma at her apartment, exchanging modest gifts and eating too much food. Emma pulled Carter aside while Dylan was distracted with his new Lego set. "You look different," she observed. "Different how?" "Less tired. Less like you're carrying the weight of the world." She smiled. "Vanessa's good for you." It's not like that." "Sure it's not. That's why you talk to her every day and smile whenever her name comes up." Carter felt heat creep up his neck. "I care about her, but I'm not ready for anything serious. It's too soon after Sarah." "Sarah's been gone almost 4 years, Carter. At some point, it's not too soon anymore. It's just fear." The words stung because they were true. Sarah would have wanted him to move on, would have been frustrated by his insistence on mourning her forever. She'd made him promise in those final weeks that he'd let himself be happy again. But knowing what Sarah wanted and actually doing it were different things. Emma squeezed his shoulder. "I'm not saying rush into anything. Just don't close yourself off because you're scared. You deserve to be happy." "I'll think about it." "Good. Now go help your son with that Lego Death Star before he gets frustrated and throws pieces at the cat." The week before trial, Carter barely slept. He ran through his testimony 100 times, second-guessing every answer. Marcus assured him he was ready, but Carter didn't feel ready. He felt terrified. The night before they were set to begin, Vanessa showed up at his apartment with takeout and a determination to get Carter's mind off the trial. "We're not talking about the case," she announced, setting containers of Thai food on his kitchen counter. "We're eating, watching something mindless on TV, and pretending tomorrow isn't happening." "I'm not sure I can pretend that." "Try anyway." They ate pad Thai and watched a cooking competition show that neither of them really cared about. Dylan had already gone to Emma's for the week. Carter didn't want him around for the media circus the trial would bring. The apartment felt too quiet without his son's energy filling the space. Halfway through the second episode, Carter turned off the TV. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know." "What if we lose? What if I put Dylan through all of this and end up with nothing?" Vanessa shifted to face him on the couch. "Then you'll still have shown him that some things are worth fighting for, that integrity matters more than comfort, that his father was brave enough to stand up for what was right." "That's a nice speech, but it doesn't pay the bills if Richard destroys my reputation." "Your reputation is already being rebuilt. The contractors who dropped you, 3 of them have reached out in the past month asking if you're available for work. The industry is watching this case, Carter. People are rooting for you." "And if those people are disappointed?" "Then we figure out plan B together." Vanessa took his hand. "You're not doing this alone. You keep acting like you are, but you're not." Carter looked at their joined hands. "I'm not good at accepting help. Sarah used to get so frustrated with me about that. I'd rather struggle alone than admit I needed someone. I've noticed. It's one of your less charming qualities." He laughed despite the tension. "Sorry." "Don't apologize. Just try to remember that strength isn't always about handling everything yourself. Sometimes it's about letting other people help carry the weight." They sat in silence for a while, the cooking show forgotten. Eventually, Vanessa shifted closer, resting her head on Carter's shoulder. He put his arm around her, and they stayed like that until exhaustion pulled them both toward sleep. Carter woke up on the couch at 3 a.m. to find Vanessa still there, curled against him. He should wake her, should send her home,
should maintain some professional distance before walking into a courtroom in a few hours. Instead, he pulled the blanket from the back of the couch over both of them and went back to sleep. January 15th dawned gray and bitterly cold. Carter stood outside the courthouse in his borrowed suit, the same one he'd worn to that disastrous date with Chloe a year ago, and watched reporters gather on the steps. Marcus appeared beside him. "Ready?" "No, but let's do it anyway." The courtroom was smaller than Carter expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, uncomfortable benches for spectators. Richard sat at the defense table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits, looking calm and completely unbothered. He glanced at Carter once, his expression unreadable, then turned back to his attorneys. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for grandstanding. She called the court to order and ran through preliminary instructions with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The trial lasted 6 days. Carter testified for 8 hours total, walking through every detail of how he'd created the Horizon Project. Marcus led him through the timeline carefully, establishing his wife's illness, his isolation, his need to create something beautiful during the darkest period of his life. Richard's lawyer, a man named Hastings, who looked like he charged $1,000 an hour, tried to tear Carter's credibility apart on cross-examination. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it true you were terminated from Vaughn and Associates for performance issues?" "I was terminated 3 weeks after my wife died. Richard claimed it was performance-related, but that's not accurate." "Did you or did you not miss multiple deadlines in the months before your termination?" "I missed one deadline because I was taking care of my dying wife." "So you were, in fact, unable to fulfill your professional obligations." "I was dealing with a personal tragedy while trying to keep my job." "Those are different things." Hastings paced in front of the witness stand. "You've testified that you created the Horizon Project at home, on your personal time. But you were employed by Vaughn and Associates during that period, correct?" "Yes." "And your employment contract stated that any designs created during your tenure belonged to the company." "The contract said designs created for the company belonged to the company. The Horizon Project wasn't for Vaughn and Associates. It was personal work." "Personal work you never showed anyone, never mentioned to colleagues, never attempted to develop or monetize." Hastings smiled. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it possible you're simply misremembering the timeline? That you did some preliminary sketches that the team at Vaughn and Associates then developed into the final project?" "No, that's not what happened." "But you were grieving, under tremendous stress, taking medication for depression and seeing a therapist. Is it possible your memory of this period is unreliable?" Marcus stood. "Objection. Counsel is speculating about the witness's mental state." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Move on, Mr. Hastings." The cross-examination continued like that for hours. Hastings picking at every detail, trying to find inconsistencies or holes in Carter's testimony. But Carter held firm. He knew what he'd created, knew when and how and why. No amount of legal maneuvering could change the truth. Jennifer testified about the digital forensics, the metadata proving Carter had created every design file, the security footage showing Richard accessing Carter's cloud storage days after his termination, the witness statements from former Vaughn employees. The 2 other architects Richard had stolen from took the stand and described eerily similar patterns. Junior employees whose work had been appropriated, designs claimed by Richard as his own, careers destroyed when they tried to speak up. By the time the prosecution rested, the evidence was overwhelming. Richard took the stand on the 5th day. He was smooth, exactly as Jennifer had warned, calm, articulate, completely believable, as he explained how the Horizon Project had been a collaborative effort across his entire firm, how Carter had contributed some preliminary ideas that the team had refined, how unfortunate it was that Carter's grief had led him to misremember his role in the process. "Mr. Hayes was going through a difficult time," Richard said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I understand why he might want to believe he was responsible for something great, but the reality is that the Horizon Project was the result of dozens of people's contributions, not one individual's work." Watching him lie with such ease made Carter's stomach turn. This was a man who felt no shame, no remorse, no awareness that what he'd done was wrong. To Richard, stealing was just business. Destroying careers was just the cost of building an empire. Marcus's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Vaughn, you testified that the Horizon project was collaborative. Can you name the other architects who worked on it? Richard listed several names smoothly. And do any of those people have design files from the project on their computers? I'm not sure. That would have been several years ago. We've subpoenaed their computers. None of them have any Horizon project files. In fact, none of them have any record of working on the project at all. Marcus pulled out a document. This is an email from Janet Morrison, one of the architects you just named. She states she never worked on the Horizon project and was surprised to be listed as a contributor. Richard's expression didn't change. Then I was mistaken about her involvement. Or you're lying about the collaboration entirely. Objection! Hastings jumped to his feet. Sustained. Watch yourself, counsel. Marcus moved on. Mr. Vaughn, when did you first learn about Mr. Hayes' work on the Horizon project? I'm not sure I understand the question. When did you first become aware that Carter Hayes had designed a waterfront development project? Mr. Hayes never showed me any such designs. That's not what I asked. When did you first see the files? Richard paused for just a fraction of a second. I don't recall seeing any personal files from Mr. Hayes. Really? Because security footage from your office shows you accessing his cloud storage on January 25th, 2023, 3 days after you terminated him. What were you looking for? I was reviewing company files to ensure nothing sensitive was left in departing employee accounts. And you found the Horizon project. I found some preliminary sketches that appeared incomplete. Preliminary sketches that you then developed into a billion-dollar project within 6 months? Marcus's voice was sharp. Mr. Vaughn, how did you complete a project of that scope so quickly if it was truly just preliminary work? We had a talented team. A team with no design files, no documentation, no record of having worked on the project. Marcus leaned forward. Because you stole completed work from Carter Hayes and claimed it as your own, didn't you? I did no such thing. Then explain the metadata. Explain the timestamps. Explain why every single design file lists Carter Hayes as the creator and was last modified before you accessed his cloud storage. Richard's calm cracked slightly. I don't have to explain anything to you. You're under oath, Mr. Vaughn. You absolutely do. The questioning went on for hours. Marcus methodically dismantled every lie, every justification, every attempt Richard made to explain away the evidence. By the time the cross-examination ended, Richard looked rattled for the first time. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Carter sat in a small conference room with Marcus and Vanessa, trying not to crawl out of his skin while they waited. Every minute felt like an hour. Every sound in the hallway made his heart race. When the bailiff finally came to get them, Carter's hands were shaking so badly he had to shove them in his pockets. The jury filed in. Carter tried to read their faces and couldn't. Judge Morrison addressed the courtroom. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman stood. We have, Your Honor. Please read the verdict. In the case of Hayes versus Vaughn and Associates, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Carter Hayes. We find that Richard Vaughn did willfully misappropriate intellectual property belonging to Mr. Hayes. We award damages in the amount of $12 million and order that all public credit for the Horizon project be transferred to Carter Hayes, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Someone was crying. Carter heard Marcus saying something, but the words didn't register. $12 million. His name on the Horizon project. Richard Vaughn exposed as a fraud. They'd won. Vanessa grabbed his hand and squeezed hard. When Carter looked at her, there were tears streaming down her face. You did it, she said. Carter, you actually did it. He still couldn't quite believe it. Didn't trust it to be real. Kept waiting for someone to say there'd been a mistake. But then Judge Morrison was calling for order, and Richard's lawyers were filing protests that the judge dismissed, and the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. He'd won. After everything. After 3 years of grief and silence and making himself small. After months of depositions and harassment and having his life torn apart, he'd actually won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Carter stood at the microphones with Marcus and Vanessa flanking him and tried to find words for what he was feeling. I didn't do this for money, he said, his voice rough. I did this because my work was stolen and I deserved to have my name attached to it. I did this because other architects need to know that people like Richard Vaughn can be held accountable. I did this for my son, so he'd know his father didn't back down when someone tried to erase him. Someone asked about the money. Someone else asked if he'd accept a settlement now. A third reporter wanted to know how it felt to beat Richard Vaughn. Carter ignored most of the questions. He made a brief statement thanking his legal team and the jury, then let Marcus handle the rest. Vanessa pulled him aside as they left the courthouse. "The U.S. Attorney's Office called," she said quietly. "They're moving forward with criminal fraud charges against Richard. They'll need you to testify, but they're confident about conviction." "How long?" "Another year, maybe." "But Carter, this is over. Your part is done. Everything from here is just confirmation." Carter nodded, still processing. "I need to see Dylan." "I'll drive you." They picked Dylan up from Emma's house an hour later. Carter's son came running out the door and launched himself into Carter's arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. "Did you win?" Dylan asked. "Aunt Emma said you were in court and it was important." "Yeah, buddy, we won. So you get your building back?" "I get my name on it, which is what I wanted." Dylan pulled back to look at Carter's face. "Are you happy?" The question caught Carter off guard. Was he happy? He was exhausted, overwhelmed, still half convinced this was all a dream he'd wake up from. But underneath the shock and disbelief there was something else, something light and warm and almost foreign. Relief. Pride. Hope. "Yeah," Carter said. "I'm happy." Dylan hugged him again, and Carter held his son and felt like maybe, finally, they were going to be okay. The weeks after the verdict were strange. Carter's name was suddenly everywhere. Architecture journals wanted interviews. News programs asked him to comment on intellectual property law. Design firms reached out offering positions. The $12 million sat in an account Carter was almost afraid to touch. Marcus helped him set up trusts for Dylan's education and their long-term security. Carter donated $2 million to a foundation supporting families dealing with terminal illness. The rest he invested conservatively, determined not to let sudden wealth change who he was. The Horizon Project was officially reattributed to Carter Hayes in March. His name replaced Richard Vaughn's on every plaque, every publication, every award. Walking past the building and seeing his work acknowledged felt surreal. Richard Vaughn was indicted on 14 counts of fraud in April. His company collapsed within weeks as clients fled and employees came forward with more stories of stolen work. The man who'd built an empire on theft watched it crumble in less than a month. Carter felt no satisfaction in Richard's destruction, just a tired sense that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. He went back to work on another Sinclair Misu Industries renovation in May, turning down multiple offers from prestigious architecture firms. The work was good, the crew was solid, and Carter found he preferred the hands-on nature of construction management to the corporate politics of high-end architecture. Dylan finished third grade with straight A's and a newfound confidence that Carter credited to watching his father fight for what was right. And Vanessa became a constant presence in their lives. Not just a friend or a business associate, but something more. Something Carter was finally ready to acknowledge. On a warm evening in June, Carter and Vanessa sat on his apartment's tiny balcony while Dylan played video games inside. The city stretched out below them, all lights and noise and endless possibility. "Marcus told me you turned down the offer from Fletcher and Associates," Vanessa said. "That's a prestigious firm." "I know, but I like what I'm doing now. Building things with my hands, managing projects. I don't need to be a famous architect anymore." "What do you need?" Carter looked at her. At this woman who'd sat in the cold to understand who he was, who'd risked her reputation to help him fight an impossible battle, who'd become essential to his life without him quite realizing when it happened. "I need to stop being scared," he said. "I need to stop treating happiness like something I don't deserve." "And what would make you happy?" "This, right here. Work that matters. A son who's thriving, and someone who understands that I'm never going to have my life completely together, but shows up anyway." Vanessa smiled. That someone wouldn't happen to be a pushy CEO who strong-armed you into a lawsuit, would it? Might be. If she's interested in a contractor with a complicated past and a kid who asks inappropriate questions. I think she could be convinced. Carter reached across and took her hand.
Sarah made me promise not to spend the rest of my life mourning her. It took me 4 years to figure out what that meant. What does it mean? It means I'm allowed to move forward without forgetting where I came from. It means loving someone new doesn't erase the person I lost. It means I can build a future without abandoning the past. That's a lot to figure out. I had a good teacher. She taught me that sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing, that you don't wait until you're ready. You just start and figure it out as you go. Vanessa moved closer. Smart woman. She has her moments. They sat there as the sun set over Chicago, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their own battles. It wasn't a perfect story. There were still hard days when Carter missed Sarah so much he could barely breathe. Still moments when Vanessa's work consumed her and she forgot the rest of the world existed. Still challenges of blending lives that had been separate for so long. But they were building something real, something honest, something that acknowledged the scars they both carried while moving forward anyway. Dylan appeared in the doorway. Are you guys going to kiss? Because Marcus from school says when grown-ups sit close like that, they're going to kiss. Carter's face went red. Marcus from school needs to mind his own business. So are you? Vanessa laughed. Would that be okay with you if we did? Dylan considered this seriously. I guess, but not like gross kissing, just normal kissing. We'll try to keep it normal, Carter said. Now go finish your game. It's almost bedtime. After Dylan disappeared back inside, Vanessa turned to Carter with raised eyebrows. No pressure, she said. None at all. Carter leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative and felt like starting something new while honoring what had come before. When they pulled apart, Vanessa was smiling. Normal enough? Carter asked. I'll accept it. They sat on the balcony until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. About the future they were building together, about Dylan's upcoming birthday, about the next construction project, about whether Carter would ever go back to designing buildings instead of just constructing them. Normal conversation, normal life. The kind of ordinary happiness Carter had thought was lost forever. Inside, Dylan called out that he'd beaten the level, and could he please have 10 more minutes before bed? Carter called back that fine 10 more minutes, but then teeth brushing was non-negotiable. Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder. You're good at this. The dad thing. I'm figuring it out as I go. Isn't that what everyone does? Probably, but it feels like other people have it more together. They don't. They're all just pretending too. Carter thought about that, about how he'd spent years feeling like everyone else knew secrets to life he'd never learned, about how isolating it was to think you were the only one struggling, about how connection, real, honest connection, came from admitting you didn't have all the answers. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For sitting in the cold outside that restaurant, for deciding I was worth fighting for not giving up when I was ready to quit. You never would have quit. You're too stubborn. Maybe, but it was easier knowing you believed in me. Vanessa squeezed his hand. I still do. Whatever comes next, whatever you decide to build or create or pursue, I believe you'll do it right. They sat there until Dylan's 10 minutes were up, and bedtime routines demanded attention. Until the city settled into its nighttime rhythm and the temperature dropped enough to drive them inside. Carter tucked Dylan into bed and read him 2 chapters of the book they were working through. His son fell asleep mid-sentence, the way he always did, completely at peace with his world. Standing in the doorway, watching Dylan sleep, Carter thought about how far they'd come. From that first terrible night outside Marcello's to this moment of quiet contentment. From fighting just to survive to building something worth living for. It hadn't been smooth, hadn't been easy. There'd been moments when Carter was certain they'd lose everything, moments when the fight seemed too hard and the cost too high, but they'd made it through. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not that justice always wins or that good things come to those who wait, but that you keep showing up, keep fighting for what matters, keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today, even when all the evidence suggests otherwise. You don't wait until you're strong enough or ready enough or certain enough. You just start, and you figure it out as you go. Carter closed Dylan's door and went back to the living room where Vanessa was waiting. She'd made tea and found the cookies Dylan wasn't supposed to eat before bed, but somehow always had hidden somewhere.
"So," she said, handing him a cup. "What's next for Carter Hayes, acclaimed architect and project manager?"
Haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll design something new. Maybe I'll keep building other people's visions. Maybe I'll figure out a way to do both. No pressure to decide tonight. No. Tonight I'm just going to sit here with you and drink tea and eat my son's contraband cookies. Sounds perfect.
And it was. Not because everything was resolved or all the pieces had fallen into place, but because after years of carrying weight alone, Carter had finally learned to share it, had finally let people in, had finally accepted that moving forward didn't mean forgetting what came before. Sarah would have liked Vanessa, he thought, would have appreciated her directness and her refusal to let Carter hide behind his grief, would have been glad he'd found someone who understood that love wasn't about completion or perfection, but about showing up honestly even when it was hard. The Horizon Project stood on Chicago's waterfront with Carter's name on it now, a monument to what he'd created during the darkest time of his life. Proof that beauty could emerge from pain if you were brave enough to build it. But the real achievement wasn't the building, it was this. Sitting in his small apartment with someone he cared about, his son asleep down the hall, a future stretching out before him that held possibility instead of just survival. It was learning that justice sometimes requires patience, and that fighting for what's right doesn't always feel heroic in the moment. It was understanding that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about putting yourself back together afterward and choosing to keep going. It was believing finally that he deserved good things, that happiness wasn't betrayal, that moving forward honored the past instead of abandoning it. Carter Hayes had lost his wife, his career, and almost everything else. But he'd also found his way back to himself. And that, more than any verdict or any amount of money, was the victory that mattered.